Hello everyone. Today we have with us Orko Hor from P3. His interest line number 3, and today he'll be giving a lecture on cyclotomy.
Thank you, Ramdas, for such kind words. Good morning, everyone. Today our topic of talk is cyclotomy. But giving the spirit of my abstract, I will first tell a story to justify the title of my talk, and then we will get into the maths. So what is the literal meaning of cyclotomy is just cutting a circle, but the mathematical meaning is much more than that. It was a puzzle that was began around 2000 years ago by Greek geometers. So they had these two implements. One is a straight edge, which we now call a ruler. They called it a straight edge because they don't have the markings to draw straight lines, and a compass to draw circles. Now, the cyclotomy, the problem of cyclotomy was just to cut a circle into n equal parts. So, as these end points that we cut a circle in are also the end vertices of a regular n-gon, the problem of cyclotomy just boils down to fact that we can construct for which n can we construct a regular n-gon. We keep this remark in mind as this will need later. Now, Euclid school was particularly interested in this problem, and it's no surprise, and they were a bit successful as well, as they managed to draw a equilateral triangle, a square, a regular pentagon, and a regular hexagon. But for more than 2000 years or so, the mathematicians all around the world were unanimous in their decision that no p greater than 5 could be constructed using ruler and compass. No p-gon for p being a prime greater than 5. But then around 1796, a teenager named Carl Friedrich Gauss proved that we can actually construct a regular 17-gon using ruler and compass. And he did not stop there, but went on to characterize all such n-gons which are constructible. So one of our goals of the talk would be to find all n in n for which can construct a regular n-gon. So I will omit the phrase using ruler and compass, just because it's clear that we are only using ruler and compass. Now this discovery of Gauss was surprising and interesting in both ways, as it was the first instance where a problem from one field was reformulated into another and was solved successfully. The last phrase is important. One such instance we saw the other day was the proof of the fundamental theorem of algebra using complex analysis. Here the original problem was stated in a geometric sense and was later restated into algebraic terms and solved. So there will be three parts of the talk. One, to understand the original question of cyclotomy, that's geometric in nature. One is the algebraic reformulation. And finally the bridge between these two seemingly unrelated terms. So through the story we already understood the geometric level of the problem. For the next few minutes we will be talking about how the algebraic reformulation works, and then the last few minutes of this talk would be to construct the bridge. But for the algebraic reformulation, we need to change our viewpoint and introduce some algebra in the process. So we will take the help of something called analytic geometry. So we will use something called which is just a fancy name of the coordinate geometry you all are familiar with. But before starting, we need to see that we all are on the same page, and I will list down a few elementary construction that can be done using ruler and compass. Some Euclidean construction. So first, given a point or given a line L and a point P outside the line, we can always draw a perpendicular from the P to the line. Next, if we are given a line L and a point P on it, then we can also draw a line perpendicular to L passing through P. Now if we use these two construction in succession, it's not hard to see that given a line and a point P, we can draw a line parallel to L prime through P. And actually if you carry out the first construction, you can show that you can bisect a given line segment AB. So this perpendicular is just the perpendicular bisector of this line segment AB. So equipped with this fourth construction, let us go back to our analytic geometry. For that we need to first construct a coordinate axis. So in this problems of construction, we are first given any arbitrary 2 points. We need something to work with, right? So we are given 2 points. Using a straight edge, we can draw a line passing through these 2 points. We call it X for now. The reasons would be clear a bit later. Now mark one of the points as origin. I'm marking the leftmost point for my ease and mark the other as 1, 0. Now till now there is no notion of length. We declare this length to be 1 unit. This distance to be 1 unit. Now using our construction 2, we can draw a line perpendicular to X passing through 0, 0. We call this Y. We can do the same thing through 1, 0. And now take 0, 0 as the center and a radius of this 1 unit, draw a circle. It cuts the x-axis and the y-axis in 3 other points. So name them 0, 1, 0, -1 and -1, 0. Now again use this construction to draw a line parallel to x-axis. Now since this was a perpendicular line, this would also be a perpendicular line, and use the same construction for -1, 0 and 0, -1. So in this way, if you repeatedly use this construction, it's evident that you get a lattice or a Z lattice. Now what we have achieved by introducing a coordinate system is that now we can mark off points say A, B in our coordinate axis. Now what's the significance of marking of A, B is that using our elementary coordinate geometry, it's equivalent to getting a length of mod A and a length of mod B in either direction. Now it's a bit of natural definition, I won't say technical, that when we say a number constructible, so intuitively if we can mark off a point, if we can get 2 points whose distance are say mod A apart, then it's evident that we can construct A using ruler and compass. So making that formally, we see that A being R is said to be constructible if we can mark either A, 0 or 0, A in either of the axes. Now we have a set of constructible numbers, but this set is not just a set, it has more algebraic structure into it. Namely, it's a field in its own right, and since all those A's belongs to A, it's a subfield of the reals. So it's not hard to see that if A and B in R are constructible, then we can draw A plus B. Why? Since A is constructible, we can mark off a point A comma 0. If B is constructible, we can mark off a point B comma 0, and then we concatenate this both to get a line segment of, this is a line segment of length mod A, this is a line segment of length mod B, or if you take both of them as positive, this is just A and B, so this has the length A plus B. Similar way, you can see that if A and B are constructible, then so is A minus B. The construction for AB is a bit technical. We have this coordinate axis 0 and a point 0, 1. We know that since B is constructible, we can mark off a point 0, B in the y-axis, and since A is constructible, we can mark off a point A, 0 in the x-axis. Now we join these 2 points using a straight edge, and then we again take the help of construction 3 to draw a line parallel to our original line passing through 0, B. So see the intersection of this line with our x-axis, and using basic similarity of triangle, you can see that this point is actually AB, 0. The construction for A by B is also similar. We have this point 0, 1 and 0, B, point A, 0. Now instead of joining 0, 1 to A, 0, we join the point 0, B to A, 0, and then we draw a line parallel to the original line through 0, 1 and take the intersection with the x-axis. It's easy to see that the coordinates are A by B, 0. So this tells us that the set of all constructible numbers is actually a subfield of R. Now there is more to the set of constructible numbers. Namely, this point would be used several times later, that if A is constructible, then so is root A. This does not follow from the field axiom, since we can have fields where roots are not there. The basic example would be -1 belongs to the field of reals, but its root is not. The construction would be something like this. We have a point -1, 0 and have a point A, 0, since A is constructible. Somewhere here we have the point origin, we have the y-axis, and now take these 2 points as the diameter and draw a circle. This is not a circle, but assume this is a circle. Then take the length. This turns out to be root A. You can prove it using Pythagoras theorem or similarity, whatever you want. So this angle would be 90, this is 90, and then you use Pythagoras theorem on 2 triangles to get this length is root A. Now we recall some basic definitions from our coordinate geometry. We all know, say L is a line, the equation of L. So let us fix the field K. Now the equation of line in any field is just Ax plus By plus C is equal to 0, where A, B, C just belongs to that field. In our case, we have done, in our school, we have done that a field is R, and we have seen the coefficients in reals. A circle with center S, T and of radius R as the equation x minus s whole square plus y minus t whole square is equal to r square. this is pretty obvious. Now, if this line and circle ever intersect, then there should be a common root, and that should serve as a common root for the both circle and the line. So if we substitute x in place of in the equation of circle, it's easy to see that we get a quadratic in y. So what the upshot of this is that the constructibility just boils down to the fact that we solve a chain of quadratic equation one after the other. So before we get into technicalities, let us see some concrete example of this last remark, and first see that what the algebraic deformation we are able to do. So now we have boiled down the question of cyclotomy into, first, remember my earlier remark that the cyclotomy is equivalent to saying that we can find n points of a regular n-gon. So that's just a fancy way of saying that we can find all the roots of this equation, z to the power n is 1, or if you are not comfortable with z, x to the power n is 1, or so a regular n-gon is constructible. If you can find the central angle, you can find, then you can it's evident that you can construct a regular n-gon. So it's equivalent to finding or construct an angle 2 pi by n if you are constructing a regular n-gon. Now this is equivalent to constructing a constructible number cos 2 pi by n, 0. Why? See that we have a coordinate axis, we draw a unit circle. Now if your cos 2 pi by n is constructible, by the definition of the very definition of constructible number, you can mark off this point in the x-axis. So let's say it's something here. Now you draw a perpendicular through this point to x-axis. See the intersection with the circle. It's easy to see that this coordinate is cos 2 pi by n and the other is sin 2 pi by n, just because of this identity sin square theta plus cos square theta is 1. Now using basic trigonometry, you can see that this angle is nothing but 2 pi by n. On the other hand, if you can get an angle 2 pi by n, join a line with the angle 2 pi by n from the origin and let it cut the circle at say point P. Now you drop a perpendicular from point P to this line by construction 1. So we get a right angle triangle, and again use basic trigonometry to get that this length is nothing but cos 2 pi by n, and hence your cos 2 pi by n is constructible. So let's see some concrete example of what smaller n-gons are constructible before we get into the big theorem. So for n is equal to 2, you just need to draw a diameter, right? There, it's just 2 points. So it's not interesting. The interesting part starts when n is equal to 3. Right? By a previous remark, it's enough to construct a regular 3-gon, which is a fancy name of a equilateral triangle. So now by our previous remark, it's equivalent to solving the equation x cube is equal to 1, which is x cube minus 1, 0. You can factorize this in z as x minus 1 times x square plus x plus 1, 0. Remember this polynomial, this would be required later. One root of this is 1. The roots of this are, as we all know by quadratic equation, it's plus minus minus 1 plus minus 2, 3i by 2. So now you have a unit circle again. So you have marked off one point as 1, 0. What's the x coordinate of this? This is nothing but minus half. So this just boils down to bisecting minus 1, 0, which we can do by our fourth construction. So bisect the line segment minus 1 comma 0. Let it cut the circle at say point P and P dash. Join these 3 points and you get an equilateral triangle. The construction for n is equal to 4 is not particularly interesting, as you just need to bisect this line segment which you have got for n is equal to 2. You bisect this, you get 4 vertices of a square. But what this method tells you that if you have a regular n-gon, that you can construct with ruler and compass, so you can construct a regular 2 to the power r n-gon for any r. Why? Just because you bisect each side repeatedly. When you bisect a side once, you get a regular 2 n-gon. Then you bisect each side again, you get a regular 2 square, I mean to say 4 n-gon, and so on. We need this later, so it's better to keep in mind. Now we get into the construction for n is equal to 5. This would be the first interesting construction. So again, by our remark, it's equivalent to solving the equation x power 5 minus 1, 0. We all know how it factorizes as x minus 1, x to the power 4 plus x cubed plus x squared plus x plus 1. The root of this is 1. But what? Now if we fix zeta to be e to the power of 2 pi I by 5, 2 pi I by 5, then you see that the roots of x to the power 5 is equal to 1 is just zeta to the power j, 1 less or equals to j less or equals to 5. So zeta, which is e to the power 2 pi I by 5, which is also something called a primitive root of x to the power 5 minus 1, actually generates all the roots of x to the power 5 minus 1. Now, if you do a bit of computation, you can see that, so this doesn't need any computation, this just follows from Vieta's relation. This is 0. Now you check this. Actually, zeta plus zeta to the power 4 times zeta square plus zeta cube. If you multiply this and use the identity zeta to the power 5 is equal to 1, you get zeta plus zeta square plus zeta cube plus zeta to the power 4, which is nothing but minus 1 from this identity. So what we get is that zeta plus zeta to the power 4 and zeta square plus zeta cube actually satisfies a much lower polynomial, which is zeta plus zeta to the power 4 plus zeta cube plus zeta square is minus 1, and also the product is also minus 1. So this satisfies a quadratic equation t square plus t minus 1 is equal to 0. What are the roots of this? It's nothing but minus 1 plus minus root 5 by 2. So it's easy to check that zeta plus zeta to the power 4 is actually positive. So set zeta plus zeta to the power 4 as minus 1 plus root 5 by 2. Now multiply by zeta on both sides and use the identity zeta to the power 5 is equal to 1 to get a quadratic in zeta. So zeta satisfies x squared minus 1 plus root 5 by 2x, I guess plus 1 is equal to 0. So zeta satisfies a quadratic equation. Zeta satisfies a fourth degree equation only in Q, but a quadratic equation, as you can see, these coefficients are not in Q, so this does satisfy the quadratic equation in something called Q adjoint root 5. So now we need a bit technical lemma to see that why zeta is constructible from this. And this again, the motivation again comes from geometry, but we formalize it in algebraic terms as, suppose that you have A and B, both are real and both are constructible. Now we take this equation, x squared minus x plus b is equal to 0. I claim that the roots of this equation is also constructible. Why? Let us see, we again go back to our friend coordinate geometry. We can mark off the point 0, 1, and since A and B are constructible, we can mark off the point A, 0. I would say A, B. You join these 2 points. So join these 2 points, take this as the diameter and draw a circle. So this doesn't look like a circle, but assume this is a circle. Now take its intersection with the x-axis. If you compute, you get that the coordinates are a minus root under a square minus 4b by 2, and this is the other coordinate. Now one might say that what if this is imaginary? Then you can construct 4b minus a plus minus root under 4b minus a square by 2. So using this lemma, it's enough to say that minus 1 plus root 5 by 2 is constructible. Then you can inductively, if you can construct minus 1 plus root 5 by 2, you know that 1 is constructible, so you can construct the roots of this, which is precisely zeta. But see that we have commented earlier that the set of constructible number actually forms a subfield of R. So we can just omit minus 1 and divide by 2 and see that root 5 is constructible. Since root 5 is constructible, so is minus 1 plus root 5, and then we can divide by 2 and we get that minus 1 plus root 5 by 2 is constructible. So why is root 5 constructible? It's just because it's the hypotenuse of a Pythagorean triangle with base 2 and height 1. So this would be a root 5. So you mark off a point 2, 0 from origin and draw a line. So you can do this construction as follows: mark off a point 2, 0 and draw a line perpendicular to this. Now you have this notion of 1 unit. Take it and draw a circle. See the intersection. This length would be 1 unit. This is 2, and join this to origin. You get 2 points whose distance are root 5 apart, which is equivalent to saying that you can construct root 5. Now we go to the famous construction of Gauss of regular 17 curve. So this construction will be particularly interesting. Again, by our remark, it's enough to see that we can construct the roots of z to the power 17 is equal to 1. But again, it factorizes z minus 1 times z to the power 16 plus z to the power 15 and so on, plus 1 is equal to 0. Again, you can mark off this point 1. So ignore this case. And again, if we set zeta as e to the power of 2 pi I by 17, easy to see that all the roots of z to the power 17 minus 1 are of the form zeta to the power j, where 1 less or equals to j less or equals to 17. And since all this, there are 17 of such roots, and you just need one fact that in every field you can have at most n number of roots. If your degree of polynomial is n, in our case is 17, you have found 17 roots, so this is the exhaustible set subgroup. Now you define 3 real numbers. The motivation of this definition actually comes from Gauss' other works on his Gauss sums, or his sums known as Gauss sums. So you define it as zeta to the power minus 3 zeta cube plus zeta to the power minus 5 zeta to the power 5 plus zeta to the power minus 6 plus zeta to the power 6 plus zeta to the power 7 plus zeta to the power minus 7. Similarly, you define alpha 2 as zeta cube plus zeta to the power minus 3 plus zeta to the power 5 plus zeta to the power minus 5, and finally alpha 3 as zeta minus zeta to the power minus 1. So see that these all are reals because these all are conjugates of each other. So the imaginary part cancels out and you get a real number in each case. But what interesting is that now you see a chain of quadratic equation. X square minus alpha 3x plus 1 x square minus alpha 2 cube minus 6 alpha 2 minus 2 alpha 1 plus 1 your third equation would be x square minus alpha 1x minus 1 is 0, and your last would be x square minus x minus 4 is 0. Gauss, being excellent in computation, actually showed that zeta is the root of this equation, alpha 3 is the root of this equation, alpha 2 is the root of this equation, and alpha 1 is the root of this equation. And then you can use this lemma to inductively construct zeta from first constructing alpha 1, then using this to construct alpha 2, using this to construct alpha 3, and finally, since alpha 3 and 1 are constructible, you get zeta. But one might wonder that what made it happen. So, if you just carry out this computation, this mammoth computation of 4 consecutive quadratic equation, you can see that this is equivalent to saying that your zeta can be written as a sum of nested radicals. So in this case, every time you adjoin when you solve a quadratic equation, what you actually do is you add and subtract some number and take square roots. So you have to, so this actually boils down to the fact that zeta is expressible as a chain of quadratic radicals. So now if you write as zeta as cos 2 pi by 17 plus I sin 2 pi by 17, so one such expression of cos 2 pi by 17 becomes minus 16 minus 1 by 16 plus 1 by 16 root 17 plus 1 by 16 plus 1 by 8 17 plus 3 root 17 minus 34 root under 34 minus 2 root 17 minus 2 root under, so this should also be under square root 34 plus 2 root 17. So this was actually explicitly computed by Gauss. We are no Gauss, so we just see it as a fascinating expression. Now what our intuition tells us that when can a regular p-gon be constructible? We can construct a regular 3-gon, a regular 5-gon, and then there is a huge jump up to regular 17-gon. So what's common between these three is that you can see that each of these primes are something of the form 2 to the power k plus 1. So for your 3 it's 2 to the power 1 plus 1, for 5 it's 2 square plus 1, for 17 it's 2 to the power 4 plus 1. So one might guess that if your prime is of the form 2 to the power k plus 1, you might have some hope of constructing a regular p-gon using our straight edge and compass. But from elementary number theory, you know that if your prime is of the form 2 to the power k plus 1, your k has to be a power of 2 itself, so it's of the form 2 to the power r plus 1. So the numbers of the form 2 to the power n plus 1 are called Fermat numbers, as Fermat was the one who actually investigated this number, and the primes among them are called Fermat primes. Fermat actually conjectured that every number of the form 2 to the power n plus 1 is prime, but till now we have found only 3, 5, 17, 257, 257, and 2 to the power 4 plus 1 is also a prime, 65,557. But Euler showed that 2 to the power 5 plus 1 is actually not a prime by showing that 641 is actually a proper divisor of 2 to the power 5 plus 1. So it disproved Fermat's conjecture. So till now everything was diagrams and a bit of mathematics, but now to communicate this idea to your pure mathematicians, we need a formal language to formalize all this. So we have understood the very origin of the problem, which is geometric in nature. We understood the algebraic deformulation, and now we want to sort of understand what this bridge is. So in our case it would be both the language and the bridge, and we would take the help of something called Galois theory. So Galois theory is a ground jewel in mathematics and deserves a lecture in its own right, and one of the most impressive achievement of Galois theory is solvability of regular n-gons only using straight edge and compass. But before that we have done enough mathematics, so let us get back to one more story. A relevant story. One have heard about the name Abel. So he was famous for his Abel-Ruffini theorem, which actually solved a very long-standing unsolved problem, that whether any polynomial, general polynomial of degree greater or equals to 5 could be solved by taking square root, cube roots and higher roots. But Abel showed that it's not possible by a joint work of his and Ruffini. But what's lesser known about Abel is that Abel actually tackled the equivalent problem of cyclotomy, namely cyclotomy is for circles. So he tackled the case where we no longer have a circle but have something similar called a lemniscate. The lemniscate is something of the form infinity. Its coordinate are -1 and 1, and its equation is x square plus y square whole square is x square minus y square. So this is called a Bernoulli curve or a lemniscate. Lemniscate literally means it looks like a ribbon, so hence the name lemniscate. And Abel actually tackled the equivalent problem of cyclotomy in the case of lemniscate. Now before we go into Galois theory, we need one more tool which will repeatedly arise in the proof of the constructibility of n-gons. So that's something called a cyclotomic field over rations. So we will talk briefly about cyclotomic fields. Over resonance. So each time in our construction we actually choose the primitive root of unity. So here also our character is nothing but zeta, which is e to the power of 2 pi I by n, and we take q and ask zeta to sit with it, formally called, we adjoin zeta to q, and you can check that this is a field, meaning you can add two numbers in this, multiply two numbers and divide and subtract. But how these numbers look like is a question. You don't need anything, but you can straight away see that this is a vector space over Q. Now, having said that this is a vector space over Q, I must also specify what the basis elements are. So if you take the set 1 theta square, so theta to the power of phi n minus 1, where phi n is your Euler-Quotient function, the reasons would be clear very soon that why I use phi n. So this forms a basis, a Q linear basis, with just a fancier way of saying that this forms a basis when you see it as a vector space over Q. And now if you have a basis, you can represent each element of the vector space just in terms of your basis. So this, each element in Q theta is actually some linear combination of Ri theta to the power I, where I runs from 0 to pi n minus 1. So each terms in Q adjoint zeta looks like summation Ri zeta to the power I, where Ri belongs to the field of resonance. Now, some important, so as a natural extension of cyclotomic field, one should have to talk about cyclotomic polynomials as well. So what are cyclotomic polynomials? So I denote cyclotomic polynomial as big phi. The nth cyclotomic polynomial as big phi n of x. You can use any f, g, h of your choice. Nothing but product over x minus zeta j. The index thing is pretty obvious that it should be over j, where zeta j is e to the power of 2 pi, not 2 pi, 2 I pi j by n, where the GCD of j and n is 1. So before I talk more about cyclotomic polynomials, what are the examples? We have seen some examples of cyclotomic polynomial. One is, I demand that we need this later. This is an example of cyclotomic polynomial for n is equal to 3, x to the power 4 plus xs cube plus so on up to 1. The cyclotomic polynomial for n is equal to 5, and lastly x to the power 16 plus x to the power 15 and so on up to 1 is a cyclotomic polynomial for n is equal to 17. Using this, one might be tempted to say that only the coefficients of the cyclotomic polynomials may be 0 and 1, but this is not true. Actually, pi 105 x has a coefficient 2, and in fact one can prove using some non-trivial distribution of primes that actually every integer occurs as a coefficient of some cyclotomic polynomial. Now when we are talking about cyclotomic polynomials, it has a very beautiful application to what's known as in a very special case of a famous problem on Dirichlet's theorem of primes in arithmetic progression. So what does the theorem say? If you have a and b which are co-prime, then the set an plus b that you index over all naturals contains infinitely many primes. A special case of this would be when you replace b with 1 and then you can take a to be any integer of your choice. Since a GCD of a and 1 is always 1, so what this says that this contains infinitely many primes. But you can prove this using cyclotomic polynomials as well. You don't need to get to the theory of Dirichlet's theorem. Now, seeing the start equation of cyclotomic polynomial, there is no reason to believe that the phi n x is actually a polynomial in zx. So, which is a fancier way of saying that all the coefficients are in z. But one can prove that using elementary number theory and this identity. That x to the power n minus 1 is product d divides n phi d of x, and use induction to show that each phi d of x actually lies in zx. So now it's obvious from this definition of cyclotomic polynomial that what should be the degree of cyclotomic polynomial. We have its index over j, where j and n have GCD 1. So it's evident that the degree of cyclotomic polynomial is nothing but phi of n, where phi is the Euler quotient function. What's more non-trivial to show is that phi n of x is actually irreducible in Qx. This is a fancier way of saying that you can't write phi n of x as a product of two polynomials, each with degree less than phi n and coefficient in Q. So the enthusiast might try to prove this, but what's the upshot of this is that then phi n of x actually behaves as the so-called minimal polynomial of the zeta that we have defined, and we get a perfectly fine so-called a field extension of Q, that is Q zeta. The experts might also want to show that you have something of the notion of a Galois group. So the Galois group of Q adjoint zeta over Q is actually Z naught NC star. This actually doesn't hold in general. You can have cyclotomic polynomials, cyclotomic extensions over arbitrary field F. There, what is true is that it's actually a subgroup of Z mod NC star. But since any extension over Q is something called separable, you actually have the Galois group as the full Z mod NC star. Now we write the next lemma, which you all know about R, but we want to do it for arbitrary field K, which actually sort of formalizes what we mean by when we say that we need to solve a chain of quadratic equation to get a constructible numbers. So this is not a technical lemma, but a very natural extension of what you have seen in R. If you have a subfield of R, a subfield, by a subfield I mean that it's a field in its own right and it's contained in R. So if you have L1 and L2, which are two lines, then either L1 and L2 won't have any intersection or would meet at one point in the plane of K. What I mean by when I say by the plane of K, that we have drawn a lattice earlier, that every coordinate was in Z, when I say it's a plane of K, every coordinate would be something of the form dash comma dash, where each of those are in K. So if you have two equations if you have two lines with coefficients in K, then either you have L1 intersection L2, which is phi, or L1 intersection L2 just belongs to K. Second, if you have two circles, same thing, either they don't intersect, they intersect at a single point, or they intersect at 2 points. So if you have two circles C1 and C2, so either you have C1 is phi, or C1 intersection C2 would lie in some K adjoint through U, where U is greater than 0. This is just a fancy way of saying that you just have a real quadratic extension of K. So just as when you have seen the construction of root 5, we have seen that we started with two, so that was not two circles, but we can reduce the case where two circles intersect to a case where a circle and the line intersect. So there the intersection of this circle and this line was something that was not in Q, but something that lied in the 2-degree extension, real extension of Q. So that point lied in a field called Q adjoint root 5, and those who know a bit of field theory would all immediately recognize that this is a real quadratic extension of Q. Third one is just if you have a circle and a line, again either they don't intersect, they intersect at a single point, or they intersect at 2 points. So it's just if this is phi or C1 intersection L1. It's again some. So in this case, this was the diagram that we have drawn earlier. So mark out this 2, 0. Take this circle and join this line. So this was the point where the circle and the line was intersected, and you had something over Q adjoint root 5. L1 is just a basic computation. One can easily check by writing out the equation of two lines and computing. 2 can be reduced to the case 3. Why? If you have two circles, say C1 has the coordinate, not the coordinate but the equation x square plus y square plus ax plus by plus c equal to 0, and C2 have x square plus y square plus a prime x plus b prime y plus c prime equal to 0. It's easy to check that the intersection of C1 and C2 is same as the intersection of C1 and the line L1, which is nothing but a minus a prime x plus b minus b prime x, b minus b prime y plus c minus c prime equal to 0. So we have reduced the case of 2 to just the case of 3. So to prove this lemma, we just need to prove that 3 holds. We already have the equation of the circle C1 as x squared plus y squared plus ax plus by plus c equal to 0. Take the equation of the line as some dx plus ey plus f is equal to 0. Now without loss of generality, we can assume that d is non-zero, because if d is 0 then e would be non-zero, and we can carry out the same process as we would do now, just replace d with e, because if both is 0 then f has to be 0, and there is no point in taking that line. So now we can divide by d, and we can further assume that d is nothing but 1. Now we can write minus x as ey plus f and substitute minus x to the equation of the circle, and we get e squared plus 1 y squared plus 2ef minus ae plus b y plus f squared minus af plus c is equal to 0, which I previously remarked that when you have a line and a circle, when if they two have ever a common intersection, then that would satisfy either a quadratic in x or a quadratic in y. So this would be the quadratic. So now if e squared minus 1 is e squared plus 1 is 0, then you get that y just belongs to the field k. Since this is in k, this is in k, so would be their fraction. But now if we identify this as alpha y squared plus beta y plus gamma 0, then either we have that if your beta square minus 4 alpha gamma is less than 0, you have that C1 intersection line is empty, or if it's greater than 0, you have that C1 intersection L1 actually lies in K adjoint beta square minus 4 alpha gamma, and you can take this to be your Q. This lies in K, this lies in K, so this lies in K, and hence you get the third or the lemma. So what is the upshot of all this? Three small lemmas are that you start with any plane of K, K being any field, and whenever you get a constructible numbers, either you stay in the same plane of K or you go to a real quadratic extension of K. So this is the whole upshot of this lemma, and we need this to prove possibly the most important theorem of this talk, which sort of links the constructibility to the field extension of Q. So we say a C belongs to R, constructible, if and only if we can start with the field Q K naught, and if we can get a tower, since we are finite, since for construction of a real number C, we need to have finite intersection, infinitely many steps, the intersection of two lines, two circles, or a line and a circle. So this should end at a finite step, and C should be belong to KR. Since by the previous remark, each time we draw constructible points, either we stay in the same field or we go to at most a real quadratic extension. So it's evident that it's the most sophisticated way of saying that Ki is to Ki minus 1, the degree is 2, is actually less or equals to 2, and sort of C is algebraic over Q, and this is also a finite extension QC over Q, just being 2 to the power R for some R. Now for the proof of this theorem, one side is pretty obvious that if you have a constructible number C, then by the remark we can draw each time when we draw a circle and a line, either we stay in the same field or we go to a real quadratic extension of the field. So each time, so if we have the base field as Q, if we get a constructible number, then either we stay in Q or we get a degree to extension of this, or it's a Q theta, and in this way we call this K1, and repeatedly we get Q is equal to K0 contained in K1 up to Kr. Each time, since we get a constructible number, so the degree is at most 2. And finally we get C in the subfield Kr. So now since C is in Kr, so this should mean that QC is just a subfield of Kr, since since the set of rational numbers is always constructible. Since we have started with the Z lattice and we can always divide, so each Q is in the set of constructible numbers, so QC is the subfield of Kr. So this in turn means that, so this gives us the fact that Kr over Q is some 2 to the power n. Since each of the degree of extension is 2, so it's 2 to the power n, and this says that the degree of extension of QC over Q actually divides Kr over Q. So this gives us that QC over Q actually 2 to the power r for some r less or equals to n. So since this extension is finite, it's a very trivial result from field theory that all finite extensions are actually algebraic. So this gives us that C is algebraic over Q. For the converse part, we again approach to induction. This was patronized by Gauss, made induction famous. Suppose we get a tower starting from Q to K1 to Kr, but each of the intermediate degrees are at most 2. So, and C is in Kr, and Ai over Ai minus 1 is actually 2. So now we induct on R. If R is 0, then we only have a field Q which is constructible. So there is nothing to prove. Now assume that Kr minus 1 is constructible. Since Kr over Kr minus 1 is of at most degree 2, then the quadratic formula says that Kr should be Kr minus 1 times root u for some u greater than equals to 0. And since this u greater than equals to 0 comes from the fact that this is all a subfield of R. But we have that Kr minus 1 is constructible, and by our one of the previous remarks, we had that if u was constructible, u belongs to Kr minus 1. If u is constructible, then so is root u. And since we can anyway add, multiply and divide any two constructible numbers, we get that this lies in the field of constructible numbers, and hence Kr is constructible. So you get that the field Kr is constructible, proving this theorem. Now we would use this theorem to actually prove the main goal of our talk, that's to characterize all those ends for which we can construct a regular n-gon. So the theorem goes as follows, that a regular n-gon n in n is constructible if and only if your phi n, where phi n is the Euler-Quotient function, is a power of 2. Now before we prove this theorem, let's take this theorem for granted and see that if we can characterize all those n's. So for now we assume n to be odd for reasons that will be apparent very soon. So if n is odd, by fundamental theorem of arithmetic we know that n has a decomposition into primes, some p1 alpha 1, p2 alpha 2 up to pr alpha r. And what's this phi n? By explicit formula we know that the phi n is p1 to the power alpha 1 minus 1 up to pr to the power of alpha r minus 1 times product of pi minus 1. Now see that all these primes are odd. If your phi n has to be a power of 2, each of them should go to 1. So you have that alpha I is equal to 1 for each I. Moreover, each of the pi minus 1 should be a power of 2 in itself. So your pi is some 2 to the power k plus 1, and by previous remark is nothing but 2 to the power r plus 1. So all your primes has to be so-called Fermat primes. But why it took n is equal to odd? Remember that we have remarked earlier that if your n1 is constructible, then so is 2 to the power r n1 for any r. So then we get that we have 2 to the power r times product over pi. Pi belongs to script p, where script p is the set of all Fermat primes. But unfortunately this is not a complete characterization since we don't know even today that what are Fermat primes. So this gives a characterization of all the n-gons which are constructible using ruler and compass. But this to hold true, we obviously need to prove the theorem. So the final, our last theorem to prove. So we have already seen that. So first we assume that n is constructible and we prove that phi n is the power of 2, and then we will prove the converse. So we need to specify what we are proving. So assume n is constructible so we have already remarked that n is constructible means we can mark off the central angle 2 pi by n in our case, and that's if and only if you have cos 2 pi by n as your constructible number. So this immediately says that cos 2 pi over n is constructible then let zeta be e to the power of 2 pi I by n. This is not very surprising why zeta appears. We actually want to see the vertices of a regular n-gon, and those are just zeta to the power j. Now a very small calculation will show that cos 2 pi by n is actually half zeta plus zeta prime, zeta inverse. Why? Since zeta is cos 2 pi by n plus I sin 2 pi by n, and zeta inverse is cos 2 pi by n minus I sin 2 pi by n. Add those two and divide by 2. But you can see that cos 2 pi by n is nothing but a real number. And by this and our claim that actually this forms a field. So this and this actually lies in q zeta. So this lies in q zeta. But as I have remarked that this belongs to real and zeta is sort of complex. So we have that the field cos 2 pi by n can't be equal to the whole field q zeta. But from this, it's evident that to substitute zeta with x, so zeta actually satisfies a degree 2 equation x squared minus 2 cos 2 pi by n minus 1 or plus 1, should be plus 1 I guess. Yeah, so x squared minus 2 cos 2 pi by n plus 1 is equal to 0. But see that it's irreducible. Why? Because if it was reducible, then it should have two linear factors, then zeta should have belonged to the field q adjoint cos 2 pi by 7. I mean to say cos 2 pi by n, which is absurd. So this is irreducible, and this in turn gives that q zeta over q cos 2 pi by n is actually a degree 2 extension. Degree being just the degree of the minimal polynomial of zeta over q adjoint cos 2 pi by n. But we have that cos 2 pi by n is constructible, and hence q cos 2 pi by n, this field lies in the field of constructible numbers. So by our theorem, q cos 2 pi by n over q is sum 2 to the power r for some r. But now you use something called simple arithmetic, or I call it simple arithmetic, but you can call it tower law. Just multiply these two and you get q this but we have already commented that the Galois group of this is actually V mod NZ star. This extension is separable, and this extension is normal just because every q adjoint zeta I just lies in the field q adjoint zeta. So this extension is actually Galois. So the degree of extension should be equals to the cardinality of the Galois group which is just the cardinality of Z mod NZ star, but this we all know from our elementary mathematics that it's nothing but phi n. So we proved that phi n is the power of 2 for the converse part. It's not much difficult. Conversely, what's the converse? You are given that phi n is a power of 2. We have commented out several times that this extension is a Galois extension of Q with abelian Galois group Z mod NC star. Let H be the Galois group of Q adjoint zeta over Q adjoint cos 2 pi by n. Now it's a elementary fact from the group theory that every finite 2 group has a subgroup of index 2, and not only 2, you can use this for any p group P, and you can use induction to show that there exists a tower of subgroup H1 up to HR, which is nothing but H, with, by induction hypothesis, HI plus 1 over HI is 2. Let Li is the fixed field of Hi. Since this is 2 and this extension is Galois, we get that L I over Li plus 1 is actually a degree 2 extension. Since this is a degree 2 extension, by quadratic formula we get that Li nothing but Li plus 1 adjoint sum root u. Now it's easy to see that all these subfields are just subfield of Q adjoint cos 2 pi by n, since this is the fixed field of H and all these HIs are contained in H, but this is a real subfield, so all these U's has to be greater equals to 0. But again we take the help of the fact that if U is constructible and U belongs to Li plus 1, then so is root U, and hence each of these fields are constructible, and hence Q adjoint cos 2 pi by n lies inside the field of all constructible numbers, and in particular cos 2 pi by n is constructible. So this in turn means that you can construct 2 pi by n, which is the central angle for the regular n1. So that actually proves the converse. But before actually this sort of completes our journey from Greece to Aachen, which was also there in my abstract. But before ending, since I have talked about irreducibility, so that's of a mathematical importance and of historical both, and particularly the irreducibility over Q is of special importance to us. It's of importance due to number theory and algebraists as well. The enthusiast among you can prove that actually x power n minus x minus 1, this polynomial is irreducible in Qx. Sort of. This is not important. What's more important is that once you know a bit of Galois theory, you can also prove that this Galois group over Q is Sn. So it's a very easy exercise to show that it's also equals to the degree of extension of the splitting field of x power n minus x minus 1 over Q. Yeah. So this over Q as dimension n factorial. So we have a basic bound that any splitting field has dimension less or equals to n factorial. So this example sort of gives us that for every n, that bound is actually achieved. There is a sort of technical irreducibility, but sort of more fun irreducibilities. So this is due to someone named Selma. The next irreducibility is a bit of funny, which I happened to come across very recently. Just take any prime p in n and you take any base b greater or equals to 2. So take say 31 be a prime, and for my convenience I took b as 3. If you can take any prime and any base of your choice, you expand this in base 3. So if you take a prime b and a base b, you see its expansion in b, and what would be, this is something 1 times 3 cube plus 1 times 3 plus 1. So you collect all these coefficients and make a polynomial out of it. X cube plus x plus 1. Now those who know a bit of ring theory might immediately recognize that proving this is irreducible in Qx amounts to the same thing being said that it's irreducible in Zx just because of something known as Gauss lemma. But irreducibility in Zx is very trivial here due to rational root theorem, which clearly says that this polynomial is irreducible. But this is true in general, that if you take any prime p and any base b and you expand the prime in that base, collect those coefficients and make a polynomial out of it, it's always irreducible in QX. So in this way you get a plethora of examples of irreducible polynomials over QX, and one should take a moment to admire this. With this I finish my talk.
Thank you for that talk, Orcopriyo. If anyone has any questions, now is your time to ask them.
Let me list down a few references where you can find. So the Galois theory that I said could be found in any of the standard algebra textbook. One such I like is by A. Martin. For only Galois theory, one might also want to look at someone named Patrick Morandi. The name of the book is Field and Galois Theory. But for those nice illustrations and in-depth, very naive approach to say case of 5 and 17, one might look up for the article by B. Suri. He was a professor here at ISI Bangalore, named Cyclotomy and cyclotomic polynomials. And then the next part of the title is the story how Gauss narrowly missed being a philologist. So that was sort of the motivation for this talk. And yeah.
I think this.
What a Galois group and what a Galois extension. So you say a finite extension Galois if you have the notion of something called normality and something called separability. So your normality means if your minimal polynomial or any irreducible polynomial in sense, to take example, have one root in the field, it has all the roots in the field. And separability says that you don't have something of the notion of repeated roots. So easy exercise would be to see that if a polynomial has no repeated root, if and only if f and f prime doesn't have a root in common. So that always happens for not only Q but something more generally of characteristic zero fields. And what are Galois group? Galois group is just the group of automorphisms of the bigger fields fixing the smaller fields. So fixing the smaller fields means that if you have a sigma, say f to f, if it fixes fi, means sigma of fi, small fi in fi is fi, or all fi is a. So this is the Galois group of f over fi. So for example, the Galois group of C over R would just be the identity which fixes everything, or would just be the conjugates which fixes ds. So if you have a Galois extension, this Galois group, so you always have this inequality that your Galois group over K over L is actually less or equals to the degree of field extension. But if you have the extension Galois, which I said is equivalent to saying that your field extension is normal and separable, you have that equality. You can easily prove that the extension which we work with Q adjoint zeta is actually normal and separable, and hence this is Galois. So we have that Galois group is equal to the degree of extension being finite.
Any more questions?
Yeah. It can be 2 to the power something odd, because QC need not be the whole KR. Oh no, sorry, it's my bad. Oh, for that the confusion was. So it's some R1.
So I don't think there's any more questions. You can conclude the talk. we can conclude the talk. Let's thank the speaker once again for the